Implementation Plan 34 Iran and the E3/EU+3 will implement their JCPOA commitments according to the sequence specified in Annex 5. The milestones for implementation are as follows. A finalization day is the date on which negotiations of this JCPOA are concluded among the E3/EU+3 and Iran, to be followed promptly by submission of the resolution endorsing this JCPOA to the UN Security Council for adoption without delay. B. Adoption day is the date 90 days after the endorsement of this JCPOA by the UN Security Council, or such earlier date as may be determined by mutual consent of the JCPOA participants, at which time this JCPOA and the commitments in this JCPOA come into effect. Beginning on that date, JCPOA participants will make necessary arrangements and preparations for the implementation of their JCPOA commitments. C. Implementation day is the date on which, simultaneously with the IAEA report verifying implementation by Iran of the nuclear-related measures described in sections 15.1 to 15.11 of Annex 5, the EU and the United States take the actions described in sections 16 and 17 of Annex 5 respectively, and in accordance with the UN Security Council resolution, the actions described in section 18 of Annex 5 occur at the Union level. Quote by John Kerry: the relief from sanctions will only start when Iran has taken key nuclear steps and extended its breakout time from to 1 year. For certain sanctions to lift, Iran must 1. Complete the removal of excess centrifuges and infrastructure in Natanz and Fordow. 2. Reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium down to 300 kilograms. 3. Remove the calandria, the core of the reactor, at Iraq and fill it with concrete. 4. Take agreed measures regarding issues relating to possible military dimensions. 5. Submit the initial declaration described in Article 2 of the Additional Protocol, which will include Iran's own long-term enrichment and enrichment R&D plan. 6. Only then will sanctions relief begin to be implemented in phases. D. Transition day is the date 8 years after adoption day or the date on which the Director General of the IAEA submits a report stating that the IAEA has reached the broader conclusion that all nuclear material in Iran remains in peaceful activities, whichever is earlier. On that date, the EU and the United States will take the actions described in sections 20 and 21 of Annex 5 respectively, and Iran will seek, consistent with the constitutional roles of the President and Parliament, ratification of the Additional Protocol. UN Security Council Resolution Termination Day is the date on which the UN Security Council resolution endorsing this JCPOA terminates according to its terms, which is to be 10 years from adoption day, provided that the provisions of previous resolutions have not been reinstated. On that date, the EU will take the actions described in Section 25 of Annex 5. 35. The sequence and milestones set forth above and in Annex V are without prejudice to the duration of JCPOA commitments stated in this JCPOA. Dispute Resolution Mechanism 36. If Iran believed that any or all of the E3/EU+3 were not meeting their commitments under this JCPOA, Iran could refer the issue to the Joint Commission for Resolution. Similarly, if any of the E3/EU+3 believed that Iran was not meeting its commitments under this JCPOA, any of the E3/EU+3 could do the same. Quote by John Kerry: if we believe that there has been a violation related to any commitment in the JCPOA, we can refer the issue to the Joint Commission, which has up to 35 days to consider the issue. If our concerns are not resolved to our satisfaction, we would notify the UN Security Council. Notification to the UN Security Council would trigger a vote, within 30 days, on a resolution to keep the UN sanctions lifted, which we could veto in order to reinstate the sanctions. This process cannot be blocked by any other member of the Security Council. In other words, the US can snap back sanctions by ourselves and cannot be prevented by China, Russia, or any set of UNSC members. The Joint Commission would have 15 days to resolve the issue, unless the time period was extended by consensus. After Joint Commission consideration, any participant could refer the issue to Ministers of Foreign Affairs, if it believed the compliance issue had not been resolved. Ministers would have 15 days to resolve the issue, unless the time period was extended by consensus. After Joint Commission consideration in parallel with, or in lieu of, review at the ministerial level. Either the complaining participant or the participant whose performance is in question could request that the issue be considered by an advisory board, which would consist of 3 members, 1 each appointed by the participants in the dispute and a third independent member. The advisory board should provide a non-binding opinion on the compliance issue within 15 days. If, after this 30-day process, the issue is not resolved, the Joint Commission would consider the opinion of the advisory board for no more than 5 days in order to resolve the issue. If the issue still has not been resolved to the satisfaction of the complaining participant, and if the complaining participant deems the issue to constitute significant non-performance, then that participant could treat the unresolved issue as grounds to cease performing its commitments under this JCPOA in whole or in part or notify the UN Security Council that it believes the issue constitutes significant non-performance. 37. Upon receipt of the notification from the complaining participant, as described above, including a description of the good faith efforts the participant made to exhaust the dispute resolution process specified in this JCPOA, the UN Security Council, in accordance with its procedures, shall vote on a resolution to continue the sanctions lifting. If the resolution described above has not been adopted within 30 days of the notification, then the provisions of the old UN Security Council resolutions would be reimposed, unless the UN Security Council decides otherwise. In such event, these provisions would not apply with retroactive effect to contracts signed between any party and Iran or Iranian individuals and entities prior to the date of application, provided that the activities contemplated under and execution of such contracts are consistent with this JCPOA and the previous and current UN Security Council resolutions. The UN Security Council, expressing its intention to prevent the reapplication of the provisions if the issue giving rise to the notification is resolved within this period, intends to take into account the views of the states involved in the issue and any opinion on the issue of the advisory board. Iran has stated that if sanctions are reinstated in whole or in part, Iran will treat that as grounds to cease performing its commitments under this JCPOA in whole or in part.